This is the second part of this story. As I was saying that I didn't know if my friends knew what their uncle was involved in and what the situation was. But I'm sure they had questions too. They didn't talk about it, but I'm sure they had questions too about why this happened, and it really didn't make sense for somebody to be killed and their wallet still be in their pocket, all their jewelry be on them and stuff like that. So I'm sure they had questions, whether they asked their dad about it or whatever. Maybe, maybe not. But I didn't voice my opinion on it either, because at this time we're young, we're all young. And but just as I got older and the more I thought about the surroundings I was in at certain times, I come to realize that, this is what took place, and this is what this guy was involved with, because there's no other answer for it, it's just that's what it is, and years later, I don't want to really put this story on, you know, representing movies or anything like that, but I do want to say that as years pass and you get more educated, because at that time I was a young man, and as time passes, you get more educated, especially in listening to uh, real affiliate mafia members and stuff like that, and seeing what they say, and then you just really put it together and figure out what's what and stuff like that. But just because somebody's in the mafia don't mean they know about the situation. But it could be that even if they're in a different state or whatever, sometimes they would know about it just by conversating with other guys and stuff like that. But that's just my theory on it, and you know, it's basically the story that I'm telling is a theory because I wasn't there. You know what I mean? But you know, all that being said, if I had to place a bet on it, that's what it was. But I do, like I said, I do think about you know what that guy possibly could have did, or if somebody just put something bad on his name and this is what happened to him, or what the situation was. But I do know that this is what happened to dude, and but at the time in question, I had my thoughts about it, but I just never carried on a conversation about it or anything like that. And this is many years later that I'm just touching on this because it's part of my story, and but this is what happened, and you know but a lot of things like that happened back in the day, and a lot of people was affected by it, whether it be family members or people that's surrounding the people that knew about it or knew of them or whatever the case may be. But it's just you know it's a very, very old story, but this is just when I was coming up. This is you know what actually took place. And then when you get older, you get more wiser, then you get more educated, then you actually listen to some uh, older, you know, mafia members and stuff like that, and what they got to say, and things like that, and then you just pretty much put it together. But anyways, it's just my theory on what the situation was, and but if anybody heard the story or listened to the story, you could probably come up with the same conclusion. You know what I mean? But it's just real old news, but it's part of my story, and this channel is basically my story. And sometimes I touch on different things, but this story here is actually was part of my upbringing and what happened when I was coming up and stuff like that. And so like I said, I don't know if my friends ever found out the situation, or if they even bothered to look into it. You know what I mean? Because I will tell you this, I was with them quite a bit through the school years, and then I was with them a lot in the summer, and I ain't once never seen their uncle. Now, I'm not saying he didn't come around when I wasn't there, but I just never seen this dude. I've heard about him, but I never seen him. So, and then when I heard what happened and stuff like that, I was like, wow, that's crazy. But it's just, putting it all together today, and this is many years later, what exactly took place of everything we was doing and stuff like that. That's my conclusion of it. But, that's just what had happened when I was coming up. And, you know, so anybody out there that's old mobsters, I know they got YouTube channels or listening to YouTube or whatever, maybe they know something about this. Whether they speak on it or not, I don't know, but it's just real old news. But they might know a little something about it just by hearing through the grapevine or whatever. But that's something that took place as I was growing up, and hats off to dude. But like I said, I don't know what happened, if what caused his demise or whatever. But that's what went down. And now this is just now this story here is just, these are things that we've done as far as the Pontiac situation, and the next door neighbor and all that, and just, this is just a story that's that came to me when I was a young man, and then I had my thoughts on it right then, because at this time this kind of thing was big, and I had my thoughts on it then, but I never really spoke on it. But then as years passed and stuff, and I thought about it here and there and stuff like that, and then I was, I kind of, that's just my observation of what happened and what was the involvements and stuff like that, because there's no other conclusion to come to. If there's somebody gets shot in the back of the head in a bank drive through, and they They still got all their jewelry on, still got their wallet and everything. It's just, it is what it is. That's just basically what it is. But, you know, but I just think that was crazy. But it was nothing new, or nothing that didn't normally happen in the mafia. It just depends. Sometimes you could just do the wrong thing to the wrong guy, and that was that was what it was. And you pay the consequences. But my thought was, I always thought when I got older, I always thought, I wonder what this cat did. But you know what I mean? Did he do something real bad, or did somebody just put some dirt on his name, and this is what happened to him? I don't have a clue about that. But that's a mob story of mine that that took place, in Michigan. And but that being said, like I said, this is just some stuff I was around, some stuff I heard about, and then when I heard about it, then as the years passed and I was thinking it through and stuff like that, that's just my conclusion I've come to. Could I be wrong? I don't know. But the thing is, that's what took place. You know what I mean? So, and there's only one way to look at that, for me, and that's what it is. And like I said, there might be some people out there that's aware of the story or knows about it, even if it's secondhand information or whatever. And but that's just a mob story of mine coming up as a kid when all this took place. So that's just a bad incident to happen, and whether they got to the bottom of it back in them days, I have not a clue. But anyways, that's my mob story, and I wanted to talk about Trumbull Avenue some more, and I want to talk about this dude, Big Ben. Big Ben was a friend of my dad's, and he lived on Selden and Trumbull. And he was a good dude. He was a friend of my dad's. And sometimes my dad would go by there and talk with him outside the apartment building. He lived in a basement apartment across from George's store, but it was like by the alley. It wasn't like the corner. It wasn't on the corner of Trumbull and Selden. It was on Selden, about a half a block up across from the store. And I called him Big Ben. His name was Ben, but I called him Big Ben because he's a big dude, And he's an older gentleman. I want to say at least 60, But he was a good guy, a nice guy. And I used to go over there with my dad when my dad would, talk to him and stuff like that. then there's a couple times my dad took me over there and we went in his apartment. My dad and him had a beer or whatever, and they was talking and stuff, and then we went home or whatever. And dude would always like give me money and give me candy and stuff like that. He was just a good dude, and I was a kid at the time, so But as time passed, I realized that we stopped going over there. So I asked my dad, I was like, why ain't we going see Ben, or let's go see Ben or something like that, And I'm a young man. I'm like maybe 8 years old. And he tells me, he's like, Ben don't live over there no more. And I was like, what happened? And really, I guess he just didn't want to lie to me. He just told me the truth, And he said, well, Ben invited a guy into, they were having a beer outside and invited the guy into his apartment, and they was having a beer in there, and said Ben went to the bathroom, and then when he came out of the bathroom, he caught the guy. I think he seen him through a mirror, is what my dad was saying, as he was walking down the hallway. And he seen a guy just going through his belongings. So when that happened, he went to get a butcher knife, and then he ended up killing that dude in his apartment for trying to steal from him. Because really, I mean, I don't know if the guy put anything in his pockets, but this is just a story my dad was telling me. I don't know if the guy put anything in his pockets, but, sometimes you wonder, when somebody's doing that, I guess if they put it in their pocket, they stole something from you. But, sometimes you'd wonder, well, it ain't really called stealing unless he took off with it out the apartment. But I guess either way, it's stealing, But, and whether the dude had anything in his pockets or not, I don't know. But I'm just saying that this is the story that I got, that he seen him rumbling through his stuff as he's coming out of the bathroom. And then he just ended up getting a butcher knife and just ended up killing him. So you know what happened right there. He ended up going to jail, and I never seen him after that. Whether he spends the rest of his life in jail for that, I don't know. Because I do know there's occasions where I was years later. I was at a friend's house, and this dude got shot a couple times and got killed in the kitchen. And I talked about this on a previous video that I have. And the dude that killed him, he went to jail, but he ended up getting out later. And it wasn't a long time later. I think it might have been about anywhere from 4 to 6 months. He ended up getting out. And the reason was because he was in his house, and the victim was the victim was in his house, and the victim assaulted him, so he just ended up shooting him. And so I think they might have called it self-defense, whatever. He ended up getting out and then moving to Ohio. But the thing was with Big Ben, and like I said, I was like 8 years old, and when I heard the story, and I was just wondering why we quit going over there. And then my dad had told me about, he caught the guy rumbling through his stuff when he was coming down the hall. And, dude was a nice guy. But the thing was, I guess if you crossed the line and tried to take something from him after he invited you in his house and stuff like that, it cost that guy his life. You know what I mean? So that was just crazy incident that I actually heard about, So the reason I said I don't know if he ended up spending the rest of his life in jail, because this is an earlier occasion where the dude was in Ben's house, and the guy was trying to steal from him. But I don't think that's I don't know in them days, because you're talking I was 8 years old, so it's many years back. But in them days, I don't even know if you could consider, you can't, I don't think you could actually do that just because somebody's in your house and they're stealing from you. You know what I mean? Versus if, and then maybe the dude attacked them, who knows? This is just secondhand information that my dad told me, the reason we don't go back over there no more. But anyways, this happened. So the dude, I just never seen dude after that. So that was a crazy, this is a crazy incident. But like I said, the guy was a good guy. I just think that he let the wrong dude in his house. But he was just a friendly dude, is what it was. He'd be friends with anybody. But I guess he let the wrong guy in his house, and then all this unfolded, and it ended up costing that guy his life. But that's what took place. And I remember another incident on Trumbull and Selden. I was a young man, and there was a taxi driver that lived next door to us on the second floor. And he would always talk to us, when he go into his car or getting out of his car, and he's always talking to my dad and stuff. And I think my dad knew him, really. And then he was asking me one day, he said, if you could tell me what your dad does. I was outside with my dad on the porch. And he was like, if you could tell me what your dad does, I'll give you $2 for work. And then at this time, he's a Greyhound security guard at the Greyhound garage bus station, where they keep all the, it's the big garage where I don't even think it's there anymore. It might be. It was on 4th Street in Detroit, Michigan. But anyways, he was a security guard there. And I told him, because he already knew what he did. He was just wondering if I knew what he did, because I was a young man. And I said, yeah, he's a security guard at Greyhound bus station. I didn't say Greyhound garage, but that's what it was, And so I ended up getting $2 from him. And then he said, if you ever want to make some money, let me know, and I'll find something for you to do where you can make you a few bucks here and there, whatever. So I asked my dad. I was like, would that be okay if I do some work for him and stuff like that? And then he's like, yeah, I know him. He's a good guy and stuff like that. And he was a cab driver for Detroit Checker Cab. And anyways, so he was a single dude, but he actually dated a bunch of girls. And all he wanted me to do is just go to his apartment, take out the trash, straighten it up or whatever. Things that he didn't really want to do. I mean, I guess he did it, in the past, or maybe he got his girlfriends to do it or whatever. But he was a cool dude, and he just, gave me a chance to make a few bucks and stuff like that. But as a young man, I'm over there, and I go over there. I think it was like once a week. I would go over there and straighten up, take the garbage out, stuff like that. But what was weird is every time I went over there, he had a different lady. So he was just dating a dating game. But as a young man, and they were all pretty women too. as a young man, I thought that was something else. Every time I went over there to, straighten his house up or take out the garbage or whatever, he always had a different girl up there. Now, hopefully, he was going just dating these girls, and he didn't have, you know, all on the same chain. You know what I mean? But I thought that was weird that a dude had a different girl, and I remember going home and telling my dad, I was like, he's got a lot of girlfriends. And my dad started laughing about it. And but yeah, that was an incident with dude, and he was a good guy and stuff like that. And that dude, he ended up buying a brand new car, and because I remember I asked him before all this took place, I asked him, why is he a cab driver? You know what I mean? And at this time, he said, well, it's a way to make money, but it gives me transportation too, because, most of the time they kept their cars, well, at least he did, anyways. And, or he just used it when but he didn't have a vehicle at the time, so I think it was just a good get up for him to have a job and have transportation. But he ended up buying a brand new car, and it was one of them cars that's in the back of it's made like a diamond. I can't think of the car right now. I think it's a Pontiac, but even the windshield is shaped. It goes down in the shape of a diamond. The back window. I believe it was a Pontiac, but it was brand new. It was sharp. But yeah, dude was all right, and he gave me a chance to make some money and stuff like that. And that was interesting. Then we had this couple that lived on the third floor where we lived at, and this was an attic apartment, apartment made into that attic. But anyways, this dude, he was a trip because he was a real skinny dude with glasses. This old lady had glasses, but she had real long hair. And over the years, I ended up knowing them well, but this is like when I first started seeing them and stuff like that. But anyways, this guy right here, man, he was a character because he was just doing all kind of stuff to get money. You know what I mean? Like different things. And he's the same guy in the video, my previous videos that I said that years later he told me that he was trying to take some that didn't belong to him. And he had his old lady as a lookout. And then a bunch of people came out the apartment and they rushed him and rushed his old lady. And then he told me, and this is years later when I was an older guy, and he told me that they had beat him up and they violated his old lady. On two separate porches of, not their porch, but on two separate porches of, and why he wanted to share that with me, I guess because he knew me really since I was a kid, because that's when I had first, met him and his old lady was when I was a kid. But this is years later when he told me this story when I'm, a lot older. But I guess he just wanted to tell me the story, whatever. But anyways, he told me that, and I was like, man, you're gonna have to be careful doing that. And but back to what I'm talking about, when I was a kid and I seen him, I remember riding down the street on Trumbull with my dad, and we seen this guy. There was a van outside of Wrigley's grocery store, And it later ended up being King Cole's. It's on Grand River and Trumbull. It used to be. And anyways, he was under a van on Trumbull in the broad daylight. He was under a van, and this van was like I would say it's like a customized van, but it's way back when, and it had these big exhaust pipes running down the side of it where you can see them, and he was actually under there taking these exhaust pipes off. And then when we was riding past, I told my dad, I said, looks like he's working on somebody's car. Somebody's van. And then my dad said, no, he's probably taking that stuff. And he said, when he gets caught, he's going to wish he wouldn't have did it, So I guess my dad just kind of knew what type of character he was, but, But anyways, that's what dude did that. And, I'm sure he's paid the price many a times. And I remember years later, and this is years later, in a whole different neighborhood, they ended up being in that area too. And I remember he had a primer pickup truck with like one of them big black bumpers hooked on the front of it, like sometimes you see police cars have something like that on a pickup truck. And anyways, the police is chasing him, and this is off Livernois on Military, and the police are chasing him down Military, and then another police car comes around, and so they got him blocked in. But the only thing is, he just gasses his truck and tries to push the police car out the way. But needless to say, he got arrested and he went to jail that day because we was all, just watching the incident unfold. Now, that's just what kind of character he was. He was just always into song, And but some people, that's just what they did. When they was, coming up in them days. Some of them, just wouldn't go get a job. They would just be out there doing dirt, And but basically that was the last time I seen dude is when that happened. So I guess with him trying to push them police cars out the way and all that, I'm sure